Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Diplomatic Faces, the only show which brings in a new diplomatic face to discuss and have a lengthy discussion about what diplomacy would look like and what are the aspects they're looking into and the relationship Sri Lanka has with the rest of the countries. So we always do bring a new diplomatic face, and joining with us today, another new diplomatic face. And it is indeed an honor to be here with His Excellency Jon Roeder, who's the ambassador of Germany in Sri Lanka. Diplomacy is definitely a vast subject, and being in the diplomatic field and in the foreign service sector, I'm sure it's definitely interesting and exciting. If you could briefly explain as to why did you join the foreign service?
You started the interview by saying I'm a new diplomatic face. I'm new to Sri Lanka, but my face has been around in the diplomatic service for quite some time. So when I joined about 30 years ago, I like this mix, which always attracted me to the foreign service, that you are in a way a generalist. You have to be interested in politics, economics, obviously in foreign countries, and you have to like your employer. So that means I basically believe, Germany is it sounds now bombastic, but Germany, I think, is a force for good in global affairs, whether in the EU or in the UN, and working on subjects like climate change, peace, eradicating poverty, open economies. So I still like my employer, and I think I made the right choice.
Yes, and talking about the relationship that Germany and Sri Lanka has, how would you describe the relationship both the countries has had over the past couple of years?
I mean, we celebrated 60 years of diplomatic relations some years ago, and overall the relations have been excellent. There was some bumps under the previous government when, for example, German political foundations who had been active on various issues for 40 years were suddenly thrown out in 2012 and 13. But this has been fully rectified. The present government is very helpful and accommodating, and I think relations have never been better. We are supporting the present government in its efforts for democratic reform, reconciliation, and economic modernization.
We see with the current economic development in Sri Lanka that there are so many investors from various countries investing in Sri Lanka. And if you could explain how many German countries have invested in Sri Lanka so far with the current economic development?
I mean, German investment over the last 10 years is about 80 million. That's the figure I have. So this is a number which clearly shows there's room for improvement. And maybe when we continue our discussion, I can elaborate a bit. Our trade figures, and that is a very positive sign, our trade figures are going up very dynamically. 3 years ago, we had a bilateral trade volume of about 700 million. This year, we can expect to cross the billion mark and reach 1.2 billion. And one of the effects of our growing trade relationship, and which is very dynamic, especially German exports, they are 80% up this first half of this year, is that we will soon open a German Chamber of Commerce in Colombo. And on another front, also our scientific and students exchange is growing. So since 1st of September, we host in the embassy an office of the German Academic Exchange Service. So these are signs the German footprint is growing, and our relationships are growing. Also in the tourism sector, we are number 4 source destination for Sri Lanka. About 150,000 tourists from Germany will come this year, up from 70,000 4 years ago. So overall, looks good, but there is room for improvement.
At the time of independence, Sri Lanka had the highest per capita income outside Japan in Asia. So how do you see Sri Lanka comparing its Asian neighbors in the short and long term?
You know, for me, I just have to quote government ministers when, for example, Harsha Da Silva has speeches on how Sri Lanka in 1990 compared in its export portfolio was with Vietnam, and where is Vietnam now? In a country like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka unfortunately has not diversified very much. It's still tea, rubber, and textile and leather. So now there's the time, if you want to be a successful part of the global supply chain, to diversify. And I think this Sri Lanka has missed. Also, the ratio of exports as a share of GDP has fallen a lot. Germany is sometimes accused of exporting too much, and Sri Lanka is the reverse. I think now with Sri Lanka getting GSP Plus from the European Union, duty-free export of more than 6,000 items, but so far only a fraction of that is used, that is a chance to diversify and to really open also up the economy. And I think that is the call of the hour, to open up to the world. The Sri Lankan textile sector is a very competitive, innovative, and also creative sector because it's open to competition. Other sectors in the Sri Lankan economy, they are too much protected by high tariffs, and that doesn't foster a competitive system. So open up with gradually, but it has to be done. And then Sri Lanka can become the hub of South Asia, which the government is promoting.
Automotive industry is definitely an interesting industry, and we see so many automotive markets being their presence in Sri Lanka, and Germany is definitely one of the largest car manufacturers in the world. So from Germany we do bring Mercedes-Benz and BMWs, and we see Colombo is filled with Mercedes-Benz and BMWs. So how do you see the automotive market sector in Sri Lanka?
As you can imagine, I'm no stranger as a German ambassador being asked about the German automotive industry. I don't mind that because generally it's a success story. But even in Germany, German-made cars have a 65% market share. So that shows we are an open economy. Japanese, Korean, other manufacturers compete successfully on the German market. So you have to stay on top. I wish that German car manufacturers would dominate the Sri Lankan market. What we do is dominate the luxury segment. You know, you mentioned Mercedes, BMW, Audi, Porsche. But this is nice. That is the situation in most countries, I would say. But Sri Lanka also poses some challenges. I have at the moment a lot of complaints by the official dealers who complain about unfair competition, so-called parallel imports, that there are imports from third countries where cars are registered for one day and then sold here as used cars, where in fact they are brand new, and this brings a great loss to the state coffers, first. Second, it's unfair competition to the official dealers who play by the rules. And I am in contact with the government, also the EU, that this unfair competition is being prevented soon. Because it's hurtful for all the players and who play by the rules, and for the treasury who misses a lot of revenue. And it might be also a good moment to modernize the tax and the duty structure, because the present system, I think, invites misuse.
After 50 years of existence, the European Union's future is definitely at stake. And the exit of Britain from the EU is the bone of contention So if you could explain as to what are your views on that particular aspect?
I mean, there has been a broad vote on the Brexit last year. It was a democratic decision, a very close one by the UK electorate, and I think everybody respects that. But the EU has a clear negotiation mandate. And to put it bluntly, if you're in, you're in. If you're out, you're out. It can't be the same. So Britain has to decide on what kind of relationship there's going to be, trade-wise. There are examples like Switzerland, Norway. When you're out, you can still be part of the internal market. I think personally it's a very unfortunate decision because going alone, in my view, is not the way forward. But I'm very optimistic that it will be an amicable divorce. And of course, geographically, we are still all in Europe. For Germany, the UK is one of the most important trading partners, and I think that will continue also in the future. And we see, as you can see now, there's a competition because EU institutions like the banking authority, the medical, the authority which regulates drugs has to move from London. There's heavy competition. I think 18 European cities compete for the new site. So this is unfortunately also a loss for the UK. Germany is very active in the financial sector, so Frankfurt sees new chances with the Brexit. But I think there will be bumps, but that's why you have negotiations to minimize them. And the EU is still attractive. We have a lot of applicant countries in Eastern Europe who want to be part of the EU. So that is one part. And the other part is, of course, when there's a vote on leaving, there has to be also some reflection in the EU what has to be improved, and questions of migration, of how to develop the EU further, competences. We also are discussing that, that the people feel that the EU is still the best solution. I'm 100% sure that it is the best solution. I studied in a way Europe at the College of Europe some 30 years ago, and I grew up with this dream of having no borders anymore. And for young people, it's true. My kids studied in France, in Austria. They don't need a passport anymore to travel. Do we want the borders fully back? No, I don't want it. I want an open Europe, and I think the EU is the best way to achieve that.
What do you believe is the best thing that is happening post-conflict in the northern and the eastern region? We know that there was a huge conflict that was happening in the northern and the eastern regions. So do you see in your aspect that there is room for improvement after this conflict, or is it just the same that will continue to be in the future? Or do we see an improvement?
Definitely. Sri Lanka has since 2015 embarked on a domestic reconciliation policy. We support that very much. I not only mean Germany, but a lot of countries, the UN. There was this resolution which is co-sponsored by Sri Lanka, which sets out all the projects Sri Lanka wants to achieve. And when I see what happens in the north or in the east, there's always the glass for me is half full and not half empty. So we see there's a land return. Thousands of acres have been returned. I remember some months ago in Miladi, some fishermen received their land back. Is it happening fast enough for the people who are waiting? Never. But it's happening, and that's the good story. Creating employment. Companies are going into the north. Then legislative improvements. The Office of Missing Persons is becoming operational now. The Enforced Disappearances Bill is being debated, the Truth Commission. And so things are happening. There's the reform of the Anti-Terrorism Act in the making. The Parliament just presented its interim report on devolution. And coming from a country which practices devolution, we are also providing support, best practices. Every country has to find its own way. But I think the main message is the glass is half full and things are happening. Fast enough? Never. Never anything happens somewhere fast enough. But we live in a democracy which drives on debate and compromise. Concretely, where are we helping? Germany last year set up a vocational training institute through our development agency GIZ in Kilinochi. Now, 3 weeks ago, the second batch started its training. 400 young people from all backgrounds, Tamil, Sinhala, Muslim, young men and women starting their professional career, being trained there in Kilinochi, in mechatronics, in food technology, IT, and this is a model which Germany has already successfully applied 40 years ago with German Tech and Moratuva. Now we are in discussion with the government to establish another center in Matara in the south. There will soon a German evaluation mission coming there. And so, things are happening. And I think that's a good story. And the discussions within the government and with society on devolution are also progressing. Fast enough? If you ask people, never. But things are progressing.
Can we make it efficient, or is there a way that all these things which are happening in a day-to-day lifetime to make it efficient, or let it just be the way it's going in the same pace?
I mean, society in a democracy, you elect your representatives and they act on your behalf. Same in Germany. I can give you an example. Our new airport in Berlin was supposed to open in 2013. It has still not opened. So we also have sometimes very long delays and people get frustrated. But I think in a democracy, patience is important. But of course, society also has to get involved, and politics has to show political leadership. The present government campaigned on devolution, on promises like abolition of the executive presidency. And of course, people, in a democracy say what you do and do what you say. And that's, I think, important. Credibility is important. And I think the government still says it will continue on that road. And that was their mandate.
We also see that there has been a transition that has taken place in Sri Lanka. So is the embassy doing anything to promote the good governance and the reconciliation in Sri Lanka? How does that aspect?
On various fronts. One example, again, this vocational training center. It's part of our, in a way, a concrete example of reconciliation, because this center was set up. It's in Kilinochi, but people... They are also Sinhala students. They are female students. The language training is in English. So in a concrete way, young people coming together, being trained, skilled for a modern society. Then we have a project by GIZ on memory culture, where people learn to come to terms with the past, to bring people together. We had a program also with ONUR, GIZ, on reconciliation through cultural events. We are offering support in when it comes to devolution aspects, or there are discussions whether there would be beside a Supreme Court a constitutional court. last Monday, together with the UN, we financed a workshop on transitional justice. And I used a famous quote when Germany unified by an East German civil rights activist. And she said, we expected justice, but we got what we got was rule of law. With that, she meant we expected everything happening at once, but in a rule of law state, it takes time, and you can never make past tragedies fully right. The state can provide some justice through compensation. For example, again, land return, big thing in East Germany too. After unification, Germany decided, it was in the unification treaty, all land which was expropriated by the Soviets between 45 and 49 is not given back. Only which was expropriated by the communist rulers in East Germany after 49. So a lot of people, it was a decision, and they only got compensation. So justice can never, or people who could not go to school because they were Catholic or they were against the regime, couldn't study. They had a lower pension. How can you fully rectify that? So there are thousands of questions, but I think the government is on the right track with the OMP and all these other initiatives to give the people the feeling that the direction is right, and we are trying to rectify past injustices. But you cannot unmake the past fully, that is for sure.
You have been in the foreign service sector for a vast number of years and definitely have traveled extensively over the world. So if I may to ask you as to what are your few memorable posts that you have held and the best experience in this foreign service sector field, how would you explain on that?
You get asked this question very often, and my answer is always the same. Every post was in a way memorable, because whether I was in Japan, in Belgium, in Canada, where my wife comes from, all have memorable moments. You meet wonderful people, and you leave after some time. So for me, the main lesson is you have everywhere wonderful people. You have everywhere moments where it's not so nice, and you are always I look fondly back at all my postings, whether it's India, which has challenges, or Canada, and that's why I went to the Foreign Service, because it's so diverse in all its aspects that I still like my job.
If I may to ask you as to what are the challenges you have faced in this career?
Sometimes the main challenges is, of course, sometimes I forget there's a big sacrifice your family, especially my wife Sonia, pays also in often the partner in a way of a professional career, because every 3-4 years you have to change, adapt to a new environment. And also for the children, it is not always easy. And fortunately, so far, health-wise, no problems. But of course, there are countries, if you happen to get like a tropic disease like dengue, once is okay, twice I wouldn't look so happy anymore. So, these are challenges, that you stay also physically healthy. That is important. Is there, the questions of pollution? A lot of postings are becoming increasingly difficult, especially when you have small children. And it's not easy to relocate there, especially when you have a family.
And people are definitely interested in the field of foreign service sector, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers out there are definitely interested in this particular field. So what advice would you give to someone who is interested to be in this foreign service sector?
The basic thing, of course, you should be in a way a political animal, be interested in politics, read newspapers or news online, have a good command of history, basic economic understanding, and of course interested in foreign cultures. And as a conclusion, it means you should stay curious all your life, because if you're not curious anymore, how can you be able to adapt to a new country, a new culture? Because people are slightly different in other environments. And I think so far I'm still curious, and I think that is very important. And you have to know that it's a challenge for your family, because one partner normally, if he's not in the same profession, will not be able to pursue a fully professional career. You can have jobs, the partner, but when you change every 3 years, not a career in the traditional sense. And that you have to also change when you leave people you like behind and make new acquaintances. And that is also a challenge. But when you remain curious, open-minded, I think that's the best way to be really, to have a satisfying career wherever you are and whatever you do.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for giving your precious time and joining with us today in the Diplomatic Faces. Was His Excellency Jan Roder, the Ambassador of Germany in Sri Lanka. And it was indeed a fruitful discussion where we discussed about loads of things about what diplomacy looks like and what is the relationship that Sri Lanka has with Germany. And definitely His Excellency did share his experiences and the challenges, and he also did mention as to what are the aspects you should look into if you are interested in joining the foreign service sector. So till we meet again with another new episode of Diplomatic Faces, this is Vidushini signing out now.